all these words, but thank you so much. To carry forward today's webinar, which is very important, we like to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Colonel Kumbul Rai. Dr. Kumbul Rai is an accomplished and experienced vascular surgeon. He has been in this field for more than 25 years. Is the president of the Vascular Society of India, and several vascular surgeons have been trained under him. Colonel Rai was the director of vascular surgery. Please mute yourself if nobody is muted. Colonel Kumbul Rai presently is the director of vascular surgery at Max Super Hospital, Saket. He has been professor of surgery and vascular surgery at Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, which is a prestigious medical college, and he has been there as a surgeon and a professor of the vascular surgery, vice president of Indian Society of the Vascular Surgery, head of the Department of Vascular Surgery, Army Hospital, Delhi Kent, which is again a very prestigious institution, associate professor of the surgery, Armed Forces Medical College, SMC Pune, 1993-97, assistant professor of surgery, Armed Forces Pune, 1984 to 87. So he has a vast experience in the field of vascular surgery in the army, and now he is heading the vascular surgery department at the Max Super Hospital, Saket. And now today's topic, which as Sushil already said, is a very important topic, which is very commonly used now, is NOAC, novel oral anticoagulant. It has become very important in the practice today. Particularly, we all have experienced use of this drug recently in the COVID epidemic, when the people are having D-dimer high or coagulation. It has been very widely used. Today, we are going to be enriched by the experience of Dr. Colonel Kumbul Rai in the field of DVT and other use of NOAC. So, may I request, sir, kindly give your, I would say, abreast us with the latest advances in the field of vascular surgery with the use of NOAC. Over to Colonel Kumbul Rai, please.
Dr. Mathur, sir, as somebody just pointed out, you have a heart of gold. You are a wonderful human being, and it's my privilege to know you. And thank you, friends, for connecting once again. I'm going to make a short presentation because I want some time for question and answers. And towards the end of it is also my take on the COVID-associated thrombosis, both arterial and venous. And I think that would interest all of us. So let me just begin, and let me pull up my presentation, or is that going to be done by Himansh too? Either way, it's okay with me.
So you can do it at your end.
All right. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I hope all of you can see that.
So it came once, but it went away.
Yeah,
you can use that.
I'm just doing it. Sorry. So is my presentation visible?
Yes. It's visible, sir.
कौन? अच्छा आगे.
Okay. So good evening. So NOACs and DOACs are two names. They mean the same. Newer oral anticoagulant agents or direct acting anticoagulant agents, and we will use this word interchangeably in this meeting. They mean just the same. In contrast to the vitamin K antagonists which we have used, namely warfarin and acethrone, they act directly. So just 30-second on Vercostride, which has stood the time of almost a century and a half, if not longer. The three pillars: the hypercoagulable state, malignancy rightly on top, and endothelial injury, venous disorders like varicose veins or trauma of surgery or indwelling catheter, and a circulatory stasis are the three pillars, and they combine together in a way to lead to DVT and pulmonary embolism. And this is how it starts. There's a small clot in the leg, and this is an extreme case where there's a redness, there's swelling, and I think the diagnosis is pretty apparent, though sometimes it gets confused with the diagnosis of cellulitis. Now, this has the potential to generate an embolus, and some of the emboli are here in picture, though I must say that these are arterial emboli, so please don't get misled. We don't very often remove venous emboli. Now, this thrombus or embolus migrates to the lung and there is pulmonary embolism. Now, some of my slides will be slightly old, but they are still relevant. So, VTE, venous thromboembolism, is an undetected problem often when it is too late, and almost 70% of them used to be detected in post-mortem. There is a very famous series from PGI Chandigarh, if some of you would recall that, where they carried out 1,000 autopsies, and guess what? They found that 17% of the people had so admin, I can't do both the things at the same time. I can't show my presentation and control. So please politely mute the people who are there. So this PGI Chandigarh series found 1,000 consecutive autopsies. 17% of them had pulmonary embolism. And this is just about maybe 2 decades old. Coming to another point, that what is the risk of venous thromboembolism recurrence? A person has it. So the immediate risk is that he may end up having a pulmonary embolism, but the larger risk is that he would also end up having a recurrence of DVT, which can have very devastating consequences. So the recurrence of VTE is a problem. Now, and these are the risk factor for also not only VTE but also recurrence. Again, the usual culprits, cancers, inflammatory diseases, surgery, trauma, acute medical illnesses, immobilization, and we are all experienced clinicians to talk about it. The consequences of VTE are devastating. As I said, 20% could be fatal before diagnosis, and people often drop dead and they are labeled as myocardial infarction because autopsy is not very popular or common in our country, and rightly so. But what is more worrisome is this part, the post-thrombotic syndrome with a swollen leg and a venous ulcer. These are the patients who come to us, and it is so frustrating, both for the patient as well as for the doctor, how to treat these patients. Again, a little bit of back and forth. It's the leading cause of death, and it was estimated that almost 500,000 deaths in Europe took place because of VTE, and they were more than the combined deaths of, trauma, breast cancer, and prostatic cancer, which are 3 common illnesses, and similar amount takes place of deaths in US. Coming to another study, and this is a very important study because it was published in a peer-reviewed international journal, the European Journal of Vascular and Endovascular Surgery, over almost 20 years. And people who say that VTE does not exist in India, this is what it was: 17.46% per 10,000 admissions. Malignancy is the highest culprit or the most common cause, followed by post-operative, that is surgery, and general surgery, and I presume that included oncosurgery at that point of time, having the highest incidence, followed by orthopedic surgery. There's also an Indian study with venography, and I'm sorry I can't quote the author, where they did venography and they found the incidence was 59% following TKR in Indian patients. Of course, everybody doesn't agree to it, but what we have to agree to it that VT is a major problem. The single most important point is we want to prevent the embolization of the clot to the lungs. The next one is we don't want to promote extension, because if there is an extension, there is more chances of the post-phlebitic length, the picture I just showed you. We also want to prevent recurrence, because recurrent VTE is devastating, and leads to increasing complications of post-prebiotic illness. So here are the conventional strategies: acute phase, and then you aim at prevent the recurrence, and sometimes you use extended. So typically it was low molecular weight heparin, and that includes fondaparinux. You gave them for a few days, usually 5 days or till the INR came, and you gave vitamin K antagonist, and you continued them for a longer period of time. We all know that the problems with vitamin K antagonists, and that is not the structure of this talk. We are all experienced clinicians, and it can take anywhere 24 hours. This is wrong. It can take 96 hours or more, or sometimes you're lucky 72 hours to get the patient in therapeutic range, and it needs to be combined with a low molecular weight heparin. So what are the modern treatments today? Do we overlap? Do we overlap low molecular weight heparins with DKA or in another way? Do we switch after giving 4-5 days of anticoagulation to dabigatran or edoxaban? Edoxaban is not available in India. Or do we start with a direct monotherapy? And there are two agents as listed here in alphabetical order: apixaban, known as Eliquis, now available with 20 other names, and rivaroxaban, which is Xarelto, now available with probably 30 other brand names. And that's very good for the country because, patients have more choices in terms of finances. And I hope the Xarelto people don't mind saying that. Of course, you people have also reduced your price. But the good thing is that the molecule has become popular. So what we need is a simplified dosing regime, and the other advantages listed here: no dietary restrictions, no tests to be done, no drug interaction. Actually, there are 3 classes of drugs which interact, but they are not worth recalling because they are not very commonly used. It's very less labor intensive. It has led to reduced administrative costs. It has good impact on patients' life, leading to quality of life, more compliance because people don't have to bother about taking the INR test, and it works very well. 4 drugs, I will omit edoxaban. It's not there in the country. So they are either factor 10A inhibitors or DTAs or direct thrombin inhibitors like dabigatran. Forget about the bioavailability, product, half-life, all that. The question is, and I'm telling you very honestly, all these drugs are very, very good. And I talked about the 2 or 3 groups of agents which are listed here. It could be rifampicin, it could be quinidine or amidaron, and it could be, of course, the complex CYP3A4 inhibitors. I will not talk about this. It is not worth it. Just remember they are either direct thrombin inhibitors or vitamin 10A or factor 10A antagonists like rivaroxaban and apixaban, and of course edoxaban. So these are the sort of studies which are available to us, and there are a host of them. There is RECOVER study, there is Einstein study, Amplify study, Hoxsci study, and we've been at Max part of 2 studies, Hoxsci study and the extension study. All these drugs are good. So if there's one message I would want you to have is that all these drugs are very good, we should use them, and I would like you to consider that what could be the jewel in the crown amongst these drugs. So, we gave low molecular weight heparin, then we gave warfarin, or we gave low molecular weight and we gave dabigatran, and now what we are doing is you could start with monotherapy directly, either with rivaroxaban or apixaban in the doses listed here. Rivaroxaban in dose of 15 mg twice a day for 3 weeks, followed by 20 mg once daily, and apixaban in a dose of 10 mg twice a day, 1 week, followed by 5 mg twice a day. And this is all peer-reviewed international randomized controlled trials. The interesting part is the study, rivaroxaban Einstein phase 3 study, and where patients with either confirmed acute symptomatic DVT or PE were used as a kind of crossover, and they found that it was not only non-inferior, which was the design of the study, but it was actually superior. And the Einstein extension study, where they demonstrated that for a treatment period of 6 to 12 months, it could be useful in a large subset of people. We all know that traditionally in simple, straightforward VTE or DVT at least, the standard recommendation is somewhere 3 months or 3 to 6 months. So this showed that 6 to 12 months was better. Of course, it comes at a slightly economic cost, which we need to consider when we are treating our patients. So, as the slide shows, that in the Einstein DVT and PE pooled analysis, it was absolutely identical or similar, in fact not better than vitamin K antagonist, that is essentially warfarin. Interestingly, what everybody was worried about, that what is the chance of bleeding agents, and this again shows that compares to enoxaparin and BKA, rivaroxaban had lower incidence of bleeding, which was statistically significant. P is 0.002, and I must also add that this is for other agents as well. So what this also showed in a very interesting way, that one of these molecules, which was rivaroxaban, could actually show resolution of clot or disappearance of the clot in the lungs. I'm sure there are many reasons for it, for any patient who is undergoing this treatment, but this was very clearly demonstrated in this study. Some of the secondary endpoints or byproducts, it reduced the day of hospitalization or days of hospitalization by 3 days and by 1 day. 1 day, why? Because the numbers were so huge, more than 2,500, almost 2,500 in each group, so it becomes statistically significant. Otherwise, we will say, in the Indian setting, what does 1 day mean? No. I think for a person who's paying out of his pocket, 1 day does mean a difference. So, in each of these studies, the risk reduction, whether it was dabigatran, rivaroxaban, apixaban, or edoxaban, was absolutely significant. And then not only was the efficacy, pooled efficacy similar, which was the endpoint, which was actually slightly better. Now, DOACs and an initial treatment of NOACs, as I said, I'll use the word interchangeably, is reconfirmed in the Einstein extension study, which I talked about a little earlier. You give it for a period of 6 to 12 months. And what does this show? This shows, not surprisingly, that there is an 82% risk reduction if you don't use any anticoagulation in terms of complications. And this is an amazing number. And it comes at a cost where the major bleeding, which is supposed to be slightly higher, you can actually see it is very, very low. Because the numbers are so high, you see 0.7% here, but it is actually very low. So we get a benefit of the advantage of survival, of less bleeding, and actual potential benefit at a very, very nominal cost, and I'm not talking of financial cost here. So we have to balance this. You want to give a long-term treatment for this, we have to balance it against the overall bleeding risk, and the overall bleeding risk is there. So we have to decide here, and please leave out the patient's preference, because patients in India would generally do what you and I tell him to do. And it is we who have to be the torch bearers and do the correct thing. So we have to balance these two. What is the risk of bleeding while patient is receiving anticoagulation and what is the risk of recurrence with this anticoagulation. So the NOACs or DOACs significantly reduce the risk of recurrent VTE by more than over 80% without any significant increase in the risk of major bleeding. and let me add a very quick word that ASA or aspirin or acetyl salicylic acid has not been very effective in this, while a lot of people believe in it and use it, but that's another topic for another talk some other day. So this is what was proven, that if you use rivaroxaban against acetyl salicylic acid and they use 100 milligrams, which is not a popular dose in India because we have either 75 or 150, what does it happen? You can see the risk of reference here, the recurrence here. It is so high with the acetyl salicylic acid 100 milligram OD, and this is here with the rivaroxaban 20 milligram once a day. Naturally, rivaroxaban 10 milligram a day is also equally good. So that is what we would recommend in these patients. And what about the risk of bleeding? And you will see that it is more or less very similar up to 6 months or 5 months, and thereafter there is a very slight increase, but this is not statistically significant. So rivaroxaban shows efficacy and the safety in the treatment of initial, continued, and extended treatment of these patients. And look at the huge numbers, 12,000, which for a randomized controlled trial is absolutely amazing. So there is a new study which is there. It's called Zalia study, that is to collect real life data in patients with acute DVT treated with rivaroxaban or standard anticoagulation treatment. And this is for patients with VTE, and many of us are participants in that study. And we are eagerly awaiting the kind of data which will come out of this. And I have no inside information what the data is, but this is a very interesting study. So what it says tells us that rivaroxaban is efficient, safe in the real world. The chances of major bleeding or recurrent VT is significantly reduced, and this is mirroring what was in the Einstein study, which was the randomized control study. That real life experience seems to show. You see the figures here: major bleeding rate 0.8, 0.7%, and recurrent VTE rate of somewhere between 1.5 to 2%. So there is a consistent safety profile, not only in the randomized control trial, but in the real life Zalia study. Now, cancer is another beast altogether, and we recommend, it's a class 1 recommendation that anticoagulant treatment in these patients is of very great use for the large majority. I wouldn't say for everybody, but at least those with a first, at least one episode, it is a class 1 recommendation to continue. And 10 years ago, I used to give Flexane, that is enoxaparin, twice a day. Today, I use rivaroxaban, either 20 or 10 milligrams once a day. So this brings up to the question that who are the patients who will benefit from the long-term treatment? Clearly, it cannot be 100% of those patients. There will be a small subset. So for provoked VTE, whether it is by surgery, it is for a minimum duration of 3 months. Some of us believe 6 months. I do that. But the international literature says 3 months. We'll go by that. But in unprovoked VTE, when there is no cause, or where there is VTE associated with active cancer, and there is a previous history of VTE, so these cohorts, I would request you to remember a person having unprovoked VTE, a person with a VTE with active cancer, or a person with a prior history of VTE, I think we should consider very seriously longer term treatment. And we will discuss at the end what that longer term treatment is, whether it's 6 months, 12 months or longer. I honestly don't think we have all the answers, but we do know that it needs to be considered for a longer period of time. So this is what we do. What do you give? I mean, this is something very, very clear. You give initially rivaroxaban 15 milligram twice a day, and then you give it thereafter from day 22 to day 90 or wherever, or 180 once a day. And I would like to reduce it after 6 months to 10 milligrams for no other reason but because it is equally efficacious. Enough publications, Lancet, and these are all real publications, 2020, all 3 of 2020, which are saying that, patients, many of these patients have undetected coagulation disorders. It's very expensive. You want to do a good thrombophilia profile in our country, it would cost somewhere between 10 to 20,000 rupees. But if we go by our simple clinical judgment, we will, probably make a very good decision without those expensive tests. The role of D-dimer is very controversial. I will not talk about this right now, but the point is that about 30% of the hospital patients may have abnormal coagulation function, and now US FDA has actually approved rivaroxaban, that is Xarelto, to help people treat blood clots in acutely ill patients. So there are National Institute of Health guidelines, there are ACCP chest guidelines, and then Mayo Clinic guidelines, and many more which I may not have listed here, which has endorsed that these anticoagulation guidelines are helpful. Coming to something which is very close to my heart, and this has gone a paradigm shift. How long to give, whether to give at all VTE anticoagulation, and there was a lot of gray areas. Now we can now look back and sit with the wisdom of hindsight that whether what we did correct 3-4 months ago was correct or not. But it is very clear that VTE prophylaxis is not recommended with all patients with COVID-19. However, some high-risk patients may benefit from this therapy. And there are criteria listed here: VTE, improved VTE score of more than 4, more than 2 with D-dimer. But generally in India, what we have used is D-dimer. So some of us may have used CRP in patients. It was raised, and some of us have continued to use those rivaroxaban or Xarelto, or maybe some other agents in patients as well. So this is a recent publication that for COVID, especially COVID-19 patients, initial parenteral treatment, whether with low molecular weight heparin or with apixaban or rivaroxaban, was equally good, and it was then recommended for 3 months. But remember, this is 2019, so it's not true. So this is again a study from Mayo Clinic which says that there has been, whether we should use for these direct oral anticoagulants or NOACs for a longer period of time. We don't know the honest answer to that, but I would just say that people who are having limited mobility, people who are having high level of D-dimers or CRP, we could consider using NOACs or DOACs for a period of time. Again, this is a recommendation from the university health systems for, again, patients COVID and clearly above 18 years of age, and saying a very, very similar thing. a similar study from NHS, from the Brighton and Sussex University hospitals, that people have tried various doses, 20 milligram, 10 milligram, but there is a clear subset of patients who can.
Actually, the 5-weekly PPI is to maintain PPI ever 4, whatever you can. And then, as the omeprazole actually maximum for around 50 hours. As omeprazole only has still 4 hours, 10 hours, maybe omeprazole 12 hours. But as omeprazole works for
Hello. Dr. Himanshu or Shailendra, can you please mute?
Yes, sir. I think there is some technical glitch. We are trying to mute, but
All are on mute. I think I see all people are on mute.
Now I'm unmuting myself. Thank you so very much, and I am about to end my presentation. As I said, I would like the last 15-20 minutes. So again, a very hot topic, a very greatly debated topic. How long should we continue oral anticoagulation for the people in high risk group? And my sense would be somewhere between 6 weeks to 3 months. No hard data there yet, because there are more and more studies which keep emerging every day. Let me end by saying that these are some of the key trials which have been there for rivaroxaban, and these are for COVID patients. There's a PREVENT-ST trial, there's an ACTION trial, Michelle trial, and most of them are from the countries. But as you can say, that they are, the level of evidence is slightly low, so I'm not dwelling upon them. They are mostly phase 3 trials which are going on, and they're showing very interesting results, mostly in the favor of rivaroxaban and apixaban, the 2 molecules which have been most commonly used for these studies. So I would end here, and I would like to end on a slightly different note, and that's a very personal note. I would like to tell everybody that while everybody knows that VTE is a problem with COVID, arterial thrombosis is a huge problem. Our department, and I work at the Max Super Specialty Hospital in Sake, has treated 20 odd patients with major arterial thrombosis with COVID. Some of these patients, and believe me, none of them came early when the pandemic was on, have come to us between 4 weeks to 12 weeks. That's somewhere up to 3 months. In the salvageable limbs, we have done embolectomies very successfully, and we've been able to salvage the limbs. Very sad to report that out of these 20 patients, 4 of them had such advanced ischemia that amputation was required. So, thromboembolism has been a major problem in COVID era. While the focus has been on the venous thromboembolism, the arterial thromboembolism, though minor or minuscule in terms of proportion to VTE, has very devastating complications. But to very quickly come back to the venous thromboembolism part of it, because there is no evidence for any of the DOACs in arterial thromboembolism, I think in a small subgroup of patients where the risk factors are high, maybe immobility for any reasons, where the D-dimer remains extremely high, where possibly the CRP remains high, we could very cautiously consider giving them newer anticoagulation agents or DOACs for a period of 6 weeks to 3 months. Thank you. Thank you so very much for listening, everybody listening so patiently. I think instead of 20 minutes, I've taken 30 minutes. But I'm grateful to Colonel Mathur and to all the participants who have listened to me so patiently and I would like to welcome any questions which anybody would like to ask. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kanbrai. It was a nice talk. You highlighted the use of Novex so very well, and particularly with the COVID era, which people have used, very, I would say, injudiciously Novex for a very long time. We definitely got enlightened by your talk about the use of Novex in particular. I will like house open for the questions and answers. I'll ask one question at the end. House is open. Anybody has any questions, please go and ask.
Colonel Mathur, sir, can I set the ball rolling, sir?
Yes, sir. Sushil, you're welcome, sir.
All right, sir. Wonderful deliberation on Novex, Colonel Kumud Roy. Reminds me of your wonderful deliberation that we had way back in February of 2021 before the second wave kicked in and destroyed some of the families in the entire India. I was introduced to this molecule purely because of COVID, sir. Let me admit. It has been around for some time, as has been the other Novax, but I think no other condition has attracted our attention as much as the COVID itself, sir. And although the topic for today is different, it is deep vein thrombosis and vascular thromboembolism, I would like to ask you a very simple and humble question, sir. We have been using rivaroxaban in the treatment of COVID, and honestly speaking, sir, I don't know why. I am admitting in front of you, I am an educated MD medicine. I don't know why. Simply because of the peer pressure and simply because of the fact that other people are using it. I am admitting in front of you, sir. I want to ask you, sir, in COVID, what is the role of rivaroxaban and for how many days we are supposed to use it and how early we have to start it? Kindly answer this question for me because it is not related directly to deep vein thrombosis, sir.
So, I think some of these simplest questions can be the most difficult to answer, and thank you for asking that question. And as you correctly said, the second wave was so devastating that many of us used agents which we were not sure of. Notably amongst them was steroids and all the others, favipiravir, and I'm talking of prescriptions which were used as outpatients. And like you, I have also been of it that in my initial phase, because we thought that it was a pro-coagulant phase in this critical illness, we have used it. The answer to your question is that in COVID disease, in which patients to use it, I will very clearly say not to use it in all the patients. That is one part which is very clear. We could have patients as those of us who treat them as primary care physicians, even though we may be MD medicines or DMs, we could use them in patients with very limited mobility. We would probably also be justified to use them in very high levels of D-dimer and CRP. So one could argue that this could be because of a host of other reasons. And I would agree to that there are many etiologies, many factors playing in. And the duration part, which is again very different, is also very clear. I think it should probably stop as quickly as the trigger is over. That means as long as the patient is good enough to walk around, even in his own house, he is not bedridden, and his D-dimer and CRP levels are not abnormally high. I have very little evidence, Dr. Chauhan sir, to back with what I am saying, but this is what it is, that it is not a panacea, it should not be overused because it comes with a problem, but with in a certain group of COVID patients, it would be very, very helpful. I hope I have given you a reasonably satisfying answer.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I do.
Okay, sir, a personal question. My own elder brother had a double stent put in, one in BLK Max, another in Max Saket. He was on dual antiplatelet and strong one. He was on Prasugrel and he was on aspirin, and he developed COVID. I lost my uncle about a week ago, before the peak of the second wave. I lost him on 24th of April. I lost my nephew, 24-year-old, having had visited 3 hospitals, Metro Faridabad, Multan Hospital, and, sir, your own celebrated Max Saket. He was in Max Mart for 3 days. He was on ECMO for 2 days, and I lost him despite having paid, I am sorry to say this, 23 lakhs and 72,000 to Max Hospital Saket. I was so afraid when my brother got COVID. He was already on dual antiplatelet. He was already receiving aspirin and Prasugrel, apart from a host of antihypertensives and statins. Sir, when your patient is on dual antiplatelet, please do not feel offended. I want to ask you very frankly, what is the role of Rivaroxaban in my brother? Can I venture into starting him on Rivaroxaban, having lost a 24-year-old nephew in the family and an uncle just a week ago?
Sir, at the outset, please accept my heartfelt condolences on the devastating tragedies that you have faced.
Thank you, sir.
And
You are
I
a great man. You are a great man. You are a great human being.
And that said, I don't think there is any one of us who can put up our hand and said that we have not lost a family member. Of course, the number you have lost is absolutely tragic. Now, coming to the question of this part, you see, it is not a question about Rivaroxaban or Apixaban. It is about the prevention of DVT. Whether it was COVID or not, if there is a patient who is hospitalized, who is bedridden, and at that point of time, you will know patients are dying. We saw the pictures of a lady dying in her car before she was not admitted. So only very sick patients were being admitted in most of the hospitals. Of course, some other patients also got admitted. So in the sick patients who are bedridden, need anticoagulation or DVT prophylaxis, whether of COVID or not COVID. And I'm by no means recommending Rivaroxaban. Probably enoxaparin 40 milligram once a day or dalteparin 2500 milligram a day is a better option because it is given injectable and it prevents DVT. Also, I would like to add that in this setting, a dual antiplatelet agent is not a guarantee against DVT. So the current recommendation is that if the patient is bedridden with any serious medical illness, he or she should get a thromboprophylactic dose of an anticoagulant agent. What that anticoagulant agent is, I leave to the clinician's choice. So this would be my answer to your question.
Sir, another question which would interest everyone on the forum. There are 48 tuned in right now, sir, even at the end of your talk, and you will be proud of that, sir. Sir, I want to ask you, how often do we rely on a marker called D-dimer as a marker of vascular thrombolysis or as a marker of possible vascular thrombosis? Also, we know that it is a product in the a whole chain of DIC at times, and some of the patients, they get into DIC. Sir, at what level of D-dimer do we presume that this patient is going to get into DIC?
Thank you for asking some very difficult questions, Dr. Hahn, and I don't know whether I can do justice to that or not, but I will say this much. That D-dimer is a marker of inflammation, as you have rightly said, not necessarily of DVT. It is also a marker of DVT very clearly. And as I repeatedly said that very high levels of D-dimer needs to be addressed to, I think there are 2 or 3 different laboratory levels which are going on, which will not permit me to give you an absolute value. What if it is, let us say, 6 times or 8 times or 10 times elevated than the reference lab value? As a clinician, I would be happy to, initiate anticoagulation treatment in that. D-dimer historically used to be very useful when a patient came to my OPD. I suspected DVT. I ordered 2 tests. One was an ultrasound and one was a D-dimer. Or even if you order a D-dimer, if a D-dimer is normal, you know it is not DVT. So that was the historical value. Advent of COVID has complicated this picture. That where do we draw the line? And I've tried to refer to some of the voluminous literature which is there, and I must confess that I have not read all of these articles. But the fact of the matter is that it is a very difficult question to answer, but if the D-dimer levels are very high, typically 6, 8, 10 times the reference value, one could possibly be justified in initiating an anti-prophylactic, anti-thrombotic, anticoagulant agent. And I think that should be the message. What agent we use in this is a relatively less important issue.
So wonderfully answered, sir. Sir, I have many questions, and I'm going to ask you this important question. At the peak of the epidemic, sir, some of my COVID patients whom I told that I'm starting you on Xarelto because your D-dimer is high. So unfortunately, they got their D-dimers in the 2nd week of July. Their D-dimer still continues to be high. So they asked me, Dr. Chauhan, why did you stop my Xarelto? Way back in May, my D-dimer still continues to be high. Are you not putting me at a vascular risk? Some of them are very educated, sir. Sir, what should I reply to them? The D-dimer still continues to be high. Is it continuing inflammation? When I tell them this is an inflammation, they say my CRP is normal now. Dr. Chauhan, you told us that our CRP is high because of the pro-inflammatory state. Sir, kindly get me out of this dilemma, sir.
So I think you are a very astute physician, and if I can just make a very humble suggestion to you, you could say that at that peak of the time, there were many comorbidities, including COVID and other things going on, and probably you were not mobile to this degree which you are now. For a person who was ambulant, who was mobile, that in itself is the biggest protection against the vein thrombosis. And for this reason, sir, I am stopping your anticoagulation because there can be so many reasons of D-dimer being high. You need it at that point of time. Now you are ambulant. Now your risk is very low, and therefore I am stopping.
Right, sir. Sir, my last question to you, sir. And then I give the platform to other people to ask their questions, sir. Sir, I was told by one of the eminent pulmonologists of the town, who is also in charge of COVID ward in a very eminent and prominent corporate hospital in Delhi, that you give Xarelto to your patients for 28 to 40 days. But your recommendation is slightly longer. Your comment on that, sir?
Dr. Chauhan, I think I tried to say that, I think I said 6 weeks, which is probably 42 days. Maybe I'm erring on the higher side, but I would recommend somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks is my personal choice. I have absolutely no hard scientific data to back me up, but this is something which is, and as I have pointed out to you, if a person is otherwise ambivalent and otherwise doing reasonably well, you could consider stopping it after 3 weeks as well.
Sir, my last question to you, sir. Very last question to you. Sir, we often do CT scan in COVID patients, and we have this CORAD scoring system. Is this score of, let's say, about 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, directly correlating to the prevalence or increased incidence of vascular thromboembolism, sir?
The short answer is no, but what probably happens, it's not a linear relationship, but what probably happens in these patients is that as the CORAD score goes high, these patients become less and less ambulant. So for that reason, they need to be on the VTE thromboprophylaxis. I know, I have seen patients with CORAD score of 24 or 25 which did not require a ventilator and walked out. And I'm sure so have you. And we have also seen patients with a score of 10, 12 who went on a ventilator and never made it.
That's right, sir. Agreed. My nephew had a score of 14.
So as it is not really, it is such a complex pathology that we cannot answer the question within the prism of one parameter. My answer to your question would be that if the patient is otherwise requiring anticoagulation, irrespective of the CORAD score, please give it. CORAD score in isolation is not an indication for starting VTE prophylaxis.
Thank you so much, sir, Dr. Kumar. I'm extremely grateful to you for your excellent talk, sir, and for excellent answering all my questions. I'm totally satisfied with your talk, totally satisfied with your answering. I can understand you are not only a great doctor, you are also a great human being, sir, and it comes from the heart, sir. I give it to the other doctors, the other members of the esteemed forum to ask their questions.
Thank you, Sushil, for handing over to others. They're very well cast. You put your question forward with a very practical question. Most of us must have faced it. But thank you, Dr. Kumar, for a lovely answer. Over to other delegates, other participants for any questions to Dr. Kumar.
Sir, there must be some questions in the chat box. Dr. Himanshu can bring forth those questions.
I'll just mobilize the questions that are there in the chat box for Dr. Rai. Dr. Barun Kumar wants to know about a case, and he wants to know your recommendations, sir. He's talking about a case of 78-year-old female with DVT, and in which he has actually started the injection of Clexane, single dose, and the patient had hematuria. Now, what will be the next step after stopping injection Clexane? Her INR was 1.65, APTT was 25. Yes, sir. So you are mute, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Barun, for asking that very practical question. Now, I would say a couple of things. One thing is that if an INR of 1.65 is there, I would say the absolute value of prothrombin time would be prolongation of at least 7 or 8 seconds. That is reasonably good. So you can stop it. One of our guiding principles in medicine is primum non nocere. Above all, do no harm. In trying to treat a condition very aggressively, which may or may not be fatal or even severely consequential, we should not end up, I hate to use the word killing, because we doctors don't kill anybody, but we don't want to be responsible for the death of the patient because of bleeding. So you did absolutely the correct thing. As long as the INR is very, very important. We only talk about INR, but please look at the PT value also. If the PT, prothrombin time, is prolonged more than 7 or 8 seconds, it's good. That means there is a normal anticoagulation in the body which is going on. And this is to be weighed against a risk of potential bleeding. If we can in some way mobilize the patient, if you can use VTE pumps, not in the affected leg, in the opposite leg, some of the mechanical thromboprophylactic agents, that would be good enough. That would be my short answer to your question. INR is the correct test to be done. APTT may or may not be prolonged.
I hope that answers your question, Dr. Barun. With this, we have another question from Dr. Manish Gupta. He wants to know from you, sir, what will be your recommendation for acute VTE? So you are on.
My current recommendation for acute VTE, can you hear me now? Am I
Clearly,
audible?
sir. Yes, sir, you're clearly audible.
So my recommendation for acute VTE is that I treat about 80% of these patients with Xarelto primarily. There are about 20% of patients where I use injectables. And what are these patients? These patients are those with very severe swelling of limb. These are the patients where I suspect that the chance of pulmonary embolism will be very high, significant pulmonary embolism. I would admit those group of patients, put them on the standard treatment like enoxaparin 60 milligram BD or 5,000 units of dalteparin BD or if we are fond of 7.5 milligram fondaparinux Rivaroxaban, not Rivaroxaban. I will do that. So acute DVT is a kind of a broad term. 70 to 80% can be managed by oral anticoagulants. About 20 to 30% would require admission and injections, and that makes me feel more comfortable as a doctor, and I'm sure it gives confidence to the patient also.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
So with this, we have another question in the chat box on pregnancy. Dr. Sunil Kapoor wants to know that pregnancy itself is a hypercoagulable state. So how do we go about it? Dr. Kapoor, if you want to come on video and you want to ask your question specifically in relevance to a condition, the forum is open.
I think Dr. Sunil Kapoor was trying to come on video. I'm waiting for him. So let me answer this question. There is no evidence for any of the DOACs or NOACs for use in pregnancy. So please don't use them. Please use only Flexane or other agents in that who have a safety profile in pregnancy. And in those patients who have, sometimes we use in those patients who have had a past history of VTE. Sometimes in those patients we know who are a documented case of thrombophilia. These patients are rare, but please use them. Please use enoxaparin for them or dalteparin for them. And there is good evidence that after 3 to 4 months, you can switch them onto vitamin K antagonists like warfarin or acetylcholine, because the organogenesis is then complete and the chances of having a fetal abnormality if you start warfarin or acetylcholine after 4 months of pregnancy is very, very low. But there is a clear recommendation that these DOACs or NOACs should not be used in pregnancy, and I'm very clear about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I couldn't get onto the video. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we have a couple of questions as a follow-up questions again. Dr. Barun Kumar wants to know that the previous question that he asked about hematuria. So is injection Trenexa has any role in hematuria for DOAC complications?
I think some very difficult questions are being asked to me, and I don't really know whether I know the answer or not. See, Trenexa has got a role. We use it, and we use it as a tablet or as an injection in these patients. If it is clearly a significant hematuria, please go ahead and use it. And I think your clinical judgment would be as good as mine as to what is a significant hematuria. It's not significant microscopic hematuria, but obviously if the urine is dark red or if there are some clots, you would be justified to use it. Of course, the question again remains, if the patient is very high risk, what else we do for the patient? There's no honest answer, there's no straightforward answer. Probably some degree of mechanical thromboprophylaxis I have talked about in unaffected legs could well be the answer, because what this mechanical thromboprophylaxis does is not only increase the venous pump, it actually generates some of the agents which prevent anticoagulation. So that is the advantage. Please don't use it in the affected leg. We are all senior clinicians. We will never use it, but you can use it in the unaffected leg, and that could be one of the options available to us. I don't think aspirin or clopidogrel is a good answer, because they can equally cause the bleeding, or a person who's having bleeding, for the bleeding to continue. Thank you.
I hope that answers your question. We have some interesting discussions coming up. So in the last question, which I can see asked by Dr. Anil Kumar Bhalla sir, he wants to know, as an extension to Dr. Chauhan's question, that one of my patients had COVID 3 months back and still the D-dimer is high. So what should I do now?
So Dr. Bhalla, the short answer is, please tell your patient to forget about the D-dimer. If the patient is active, if he or she is taking regular walks, no need for any anticoagulation. All of us have these patients and we have agonized over them, what to do, what is the correct answer. We may not still know it, but there is no reason to continue anticoagulation in these patients on the basis of D-dimer alone.
Dr. Kumar sir, I'm Dr. Sushil Chauhan this side, sir. My very last question, I promise you, sir. Sir, I have a chronic alcoholic who had issues with clotting, and he had altered prothrombin time. I had put him on vitamin K, sir. Now, this fellow, he develops COVID, sir. And I have to think very actively, because he is immobile, he is bedridden. He still continues to drink alcohol, sir. Despite all my advice, despite all my counseling, and despite all his visits to PSRI hospital, and despite all his vitamin K injections, now I need to advise him regarding Novax. He is on vitamin K. Sir, your great advice for this patient, sir. I know a slightly oblique question, but I think you might have a straight answer.
It's a very interesting question, and thank you for asking these questions, Dr. Chauhan. The simple answer is what I have tried to allude earlier also. As long as prothrombin time is high because of any reason, no need to give anything.
Great, sir. Great answer. Great answer, sir.
Nothing. Just say, God is giving you natural anticoagulation for your sins. Please bear with it. And alcoholism, as we know, is a huge problem amongst patients, and we will not go into it. The fact is that you and I, as less than you, as primary care physicians, have to give them some answers and say that you are naturally anticoagulated, you don't need any anticoagulation.
Great answer, sir, and makes life simple for me, sir. Dr. Kumud Rai, I think before Dr. Mathur thanks you, I must thank you, and I must thank the entire team of Biozydus led extremely excellently by Dr. Himanshu and all their management team, foot soldiered by Mr. Shantanu. Over to Dr. Mathur sir for his closing remarks. A soldier to a soldier.
Yeah.
Come on, sir. A soldier to a soldier.
Thank you, Sushil. First of all, thank you very much for active interaction with Dr. Karan Kumudra, who has answered your question so well, and we are also benefited by your questions and answers. Sir, thank you so much, Karan, for all the communication, all the deliberation you had on NOVAC, and all the answers you given to us. You've been definitely enlightened and abreast us with the latest information on NOVAC. We are definitely very thankful to you, all these things. Can I ask a last question from you, sir? My small experience, post-COVID or post-vaccine, Covishield 2 doses, is there any chances of having a stroke?
Pro-coagulation state, pro-coagulopathy.
So it was a post-COVID, all was normal, no comorbidity. A lady was given 2 doses of vaccine. After 7 days of second dose, she developed a stroke. And is that possible with the vaccine, or it is a age-related 70-year-old lady?
Dr. Mathur, the short answer to your question, possible yes, probability extremely low, because the chances of arterial thromboembolism after both vaccinations is really very, very low. It is mostly venous thromboembolism that has been this thing, and new terminologies have been coined.
That's all in literature, sir. I thought of your experience.
No.
It's all literature available. Venous is very well known. But arterial, we have not heard of it, have not read, but I thought we might be having more experience in it. So I thought I'll ask this question for you, sir.
So the possibility yes, probability low, and let me make a concession. It is so wonderful to talk to this illuminating audience. It is really my privilege to talk to all of you tonight. And thank you for asking all those questions. It makes me, so motivated to speak to you. Thank you so very much.